Hello everyone! Tonight, we begin in a place far too dusty to be romantic, and far too crowded to be mysterious. The Silk Road, for all its legends, mostly smelled like wet wool and overripe figs. Before we dive in, like this video and subscribe to join our global community. Then drop your city and local time in the comments. Your voice makes our story complete. Dim the light, let a soft breeze whisper around you, and settle in. Our journey into history begins now. Let's start with the biggest misconception. Most people imagine Silk Road prostitutes draped in red silks, reclining on pillows, waiting for poets or princes. In reality, they waited for someone to offer enough dried apricots to cover supper. In one remote caravanserai near present-day Merv, walls sun-bleached and cracked, windows nothing more than arrow slits, there lived a woman with a broken sandal and perfectly applied coal. No one knew her name, they just called her Rain, probably because she never arrived when expected. The men who passed through didn't pay with gold, not here. The coin often came counterfeit, or clipped. Real payment came in sacks of salt, in crushed peppercorns, sometimes even in dull green beads meant for horses. Rain learned quickly. If someone offered dates, take them. If they offered poetry, don't. One evening, a monk arrived from the east. He claimed celibacy, loudly, but stared too long. He had no coin, only 3 ounces of incenses and a cracked mirror. She accepted both, then asked if he wanted her to pretend to be quiet or devout. He said both. That cost extra. Salt that week was worth more than anything. Sandstorms had closed the Western Trail, and every merchant was desperate to preserve his cheese. Rain made enough in one night to buy 2 weeks of food, though she didn't eat cheese. Said it reminded her of the monastery kitchens. No one asked why she'd been in a monastery. Some say she once seduced a bishop by pretending to faint in front of a scripture cart. In the back room of the caravanserai there was a single stool with 3 legs, a blanket that smelled vaguely of goat, and a wall where someone had scratched a tally, 17 lines, and then silence. She worked by lamplight, and sometimes by moonlight if the chimney clogged again. There was no bed, just a mat made from an old horse blanket and some straw. The same straw used for animal feed, and sometimes funerals. Once, a group of Persian spice sellers passed through. They brought their own pillows, and their own rules. She accepted cloves as payment and listened to their stories of cities with fountains and women who rode horses bareback. She told them she used to own a cat. That seemed to impress them. Her coal was made from soot and animal fat. She applied it carefully each morning, squinting into a shard of polished bronze. One man once asked why she bothered. She said because it made her feel awake. He didn't understand. She didn't explain. At night, when the wind howled through the cracked shutters, she sometimes told stories to the other women. Stories about princesses who escaped through tunnels, or about soldiers who paid double if you told them they looked like heroes. Most weren't true. That wasn't the point. One winter, an Uzbek merchant tried to pay her in camel milk. She refused. He cried. Apparently it was from his grandmother's camel. She still refused. Later she traded a belt buckle for a wool cloak and claimed it was from a prince. It probably wasn't. But again, no one checked. Some nights were too quiet. Those were worse than the noisy ones. Rain once said the worst sound in the world was a merchant whispering a wife's name in his sleep. There was a rumour, no one knows who started it, that she had once been married to a noble who disappeared into the desert. Others said she had poisoned him with nutmeg or cumin. Someone insisted it was just bad lamb. The truth didn't matter. She let the stories live. One boy, no older than 16, paid her with a poem. She took it, tore it in half, and used it to start a fire. He came back the next night with half a dried melon. She let him in. No one asked what happened. At the edge of the courtyard, there was a fig tree that never bore fruit. Someone had nailed a ribbon to it years ago. Rain added another ribbon one spring. When asked why, she just said, "Insurance." The caravanserai had a single rule: pay first. The second rule was never written down, but everyone followed it. Don't ask where the women sleep when the guests leave. The answer wasn't comforting. Somewhere behind the storerooms there was a space no larger than a goat pen. No windows, no door, just a curtain made from old saddlecloth. Rain slept there. Some nights alone, other nights not. One guard claimed she once outdrank a Mongol officer using only fermented fig juice. He didn't explain how fig juice could ferment, or where she found the Mongol. But again, details weren't her currency. She left one spring, just walked out during the call to prayer, left behind her blanket, her mirror, and a single salted plum in a bowl. No one knew where she went. Some say she reached Kashgar and opened a tea house. Others say she died in the mountains, clutching a broken sandal and whispering prayers in 6 languages. A few swear they saw her in Baghdad, offering readings under a different name. The truth is probably less poetic, but people need poetry. There were snoring servants, that's all. Now, let's follow the scent of overboiled herbs and step into a bathhouse corner of Bukhara, where fluency becomes a mask. Bukhara was all echoes and steam, stone walls slick with years of sweat and mint oil, the kind of place where voices got trapped and reappeared hours later, murmuring unfinished thoughts. The bathhouse, if you could call it that, had no formal entrance, just a hanging rug soaked with yesterday's rain, and a copper bowl always slightly too hot to touch. Women passed through quickly, veiled or not, eyes darting toward the steam vents where nothing good ever hid. The girl they called Afa had no real name, not since the flood. No family either. She showed up one morning after a sandstorm with a bruised wrist, and a talent for mixing eucalyptus into boiled water without gagging. That was enough. They let her stay. She wasn't the youngest, but looked it. A narrow face, half a tooth missing, and a laugh that sounded like someone tearing parchment slowly. Clients liked it, said it sounded foreign. She never corrected them. No one trained her. She learned by watching, how to scrub calluses without offending a client, how to balance on one foot while applying ointments, how to tell the difference between a paying merchant and a guard pretending to inspect the drains. Then came the voice. It started as a joke. One night she imitated a Sogdian merchant's lisp so accurately that the women nearly dropped their towels laughing. The next day she tried the accent again with a Greek pilgrim. He tipped her double. Soon she had a repertoire. Shaky Persian for old men, clipped Aramaic for traders, and something vaguely southern. No one knew from where. For anyone who seemed too quiet, it worked. Each persona added coins to her bowl. Sometimes she mixed them up. Once she used 4 different accents in the same session. The client cried. He thought she was possessed. She let him believe it. He left everything he owned and joined a monastic order. That counted as a win. One day, a woman from a travelling troupe arrived, too clean, too well dressed, with fingers that smelled like rose water and wine. She said she was looking for authentic local experiences. Arthur replied in a shaky Hebrew accent she had invented just that morning. The woman clapped, said it felt deeply spiritual. No one knew what that meant, but she tipped 5 silver rings and a half-finished prayer scroll. Arthur sold the scroll for soap and hung the rings on a wire. They clinked at night like wind chimes, or tiny warnings. In that bathhouse, identity was less important than tone. People didn't want truth, they wanted story. And the story sounded better with a rolled R or misplaced vowel. Sometimes she told people she was from a city swallowed by the sea. Other times, from a mountain tribe that worshipped goats and painted their dreams on cave walls. It didn't matter. If it felt real, it was. One of the guards fell in love with her voice. He said it reminded him of his dead wife. Afa asked gently whether his wife had also used 3 different dialects per sentence. He didn't notice. He brought her saffron once. She traded it for a pair of sandals and a knife. There were rules, of course. No touching after sundown. No incense without permission. No asking questions that couldn't be answered with a smile. Arthur broke them all eventually. No one enforced anything past midnight. The bathhouse owner, a woman called Old Hana, though she wasn't especially old, warned Afa not to get clever. Accents lead to assumptions, she said. Assumptions get you burned or married, or both. It was sound advice. She ignored it. One morning, after a snowless winter night, a noblewoman arrived with 6 servants and a single demand. A storyteller. Arthur spoke in the accent of a desert kingdom with no vowels. The noblewoman laughed so hard she dropped her towel. Arthur got paid in gold. No one asked how a bath girl became a storyteller. No one asked what stories were true. There's a rumour that Arthur once impersonated a visiting ambassador's wife and held an entire diplomatic conversation in a language she made up on the spot. It worked, until someone asked her what day it was. She answered Tuesday. It was Friday. Still, they invited her back. She learned early that exotic was a currency that never devalued. The less understood you were, the more people projected their own wants onto you. She just became the canvas, but even performances wear thin. One evening an old woman asked her, flatly, what her real voice sounded like. Effa paused, looked at the fire, then replied, "It probably sounds like yours," but more tired. The woman left a single copper coin and didn't look back. Sometimes, after the clients were gone and the baths emptied of steam, Arthur would stand at the wall and practice new syllables. She kept a tally scratched behind a loose brick. 19 voices, then 20. Eventually the wall ran out of space. So did her patience. She vanished one spring after a strange man left her a pouch filled with walnuts and a map. The next day, only her sandals remained, folded neatly next to the mint bowl. No one claimed them. No one asked. A girl with her voice was spotted weeks later in a village near Herat, convincing a judge that she was the daughter of a lost emperor. She had him in tears. Then she took his horse. It made sense to someone. Probably. Now, under a faded tent belonging to a spice trader, let's listen in on a midwife who offers blessings and birth control in the same breath. The tent smelled like cinnamon, sweat, and a kind of sweetness no one could name. Probably cardamom, though some insisted it was saffron. Others swore it was dried figs. Either way, no one came for the scent. The trader who owned the tent rarely spoke. His beard was well oiled, his smile absent, and his curtains, thick velvet lined with golden thread, were the kind that suggested things happened behind them, legal or not. But the real attraction wasn't the merchant. It was the woman who worked just behind him, in the shadows. Some called her Layla. Others just said the midwife. No one ever used her name in daylight. By trade, she claimed to be an entertainer, a healer of humours, if anyone asked. She even had a set of bells stitched to her sleeves, tiny ones, barely audible, that jingled whenever she lifted her arms. It gave the impression of joy, which helped. So did the dancing. It wasn't very good, but people rarely noticed. Under the pretense of performance, she offered other services, not physical ones. She wasn't that kind of performer. Her specialty was more discreet. If you whispered about your sister's unwanted pregnancy or your own missed cycle, she'd pretend to check your palm, nod once, and hand you a pouch of herbs labelled for sleep and spleen swelling. No one questioned the label. The authorities knew, of course, but no one wanted to be the one who interrupted a dance to conduct an inquisition. That would have seemed undignified, so they let it be. Her potions weren't always effective, but they weren't dangerous either. Most involved bitter roots, crushed pomegranate seeds, and something that smelled faintly of ash. Once she handed a client a mixture that turned the woman's tongue black for 3 days. The child was stillborn. Some called that a miracle. Others, timing. She charged by donation, which meant she charged whatever people felt their guilt was worth. Some nights she'd hum a lullaby while preparing herbs, swaying just enough to look like she was dancing. If anyone peeked in, she'd add a twirl. The bells helped. Noise distracted better than silence. One winter evening, a nobleman's daughter arrived, veiled and shaking. She asked no questions, offered no name, and cried silently as the midwife lit a single lamp. Lala handed her a folded cloth and said, "This will feel like memory." No one knew what that meant, but the girl nodded. Later that week, a scroll was nailed to the bathhouse wall, a decree warning against unauthorized herbalists performing under theatrical guise. It was unsigned, torn down the next day. The bells were quieter after that. Some say the midwife once disguised her entire setup as a puppet show, complete with a stringed rooster and 2 silent goats. Children laughed. Their mothers left with linen pouches tied tight under their sleeves. A few returned a month later with quiet smiles. There were whispers, of course. One tale said she once danced for a bishop's brother, and tricked him into blessing a tea blend meant to cleanse unholy weight. He praised it in 3 sermons before realizing what it was. By then, it was too late. He drank it himself. No visible effect, unless you count the beard loss. She kept no records, said memory was safer than parchment. If asked about her past, she claimed she'd once served in a palace where no men were allowed. That palace burned down. Another time she said she was trained by a blind midwife who taught through scent. That story ended with a snake and a runaway bride. People stopped asking. Her most requested service was a blessing dance, a short routine, 3 steps forward, 2 back, with a final spin, accompanied by muttered prayers and a sprinkle of vinegar, supposedly to chase away male spirits. More likely, just tradition. Still, women came from miles away. Some brought coins, others brought fruit. One woman brought a live chicken. Lalla nodded, took the chicken, and gave her a packet in return. The chicken was later seen tied to the tent pole, wearing bells. The tent moved occasionally, never far, but often enough to confuse the guards. By the time someone filed a complaint, she'd be in another market, another alley, another trader's shadow. There was a rumour she once helped a camel give birth by singing to it. The camel apparently cried, but no one confirmed that. She believed in ambiguity, called it a kind of protection. One evening she refused a client, said the woman's intentions weren't clear. The woman spat at her. The bells didn't jingle that night, but the woman didn't return either. Sometimes Lalla sat alone in the tent, turning dried flowers into powder, not for sale, just to feel the texture. Said it reminded her of snow. Someone asked when she'd last seen snow. She said she hadn't. She just imagined it felt like crushed chamomile. When asked if her work was dangerous, she said, "Only if it works too well." That merchant never asked again. She disappeared once, for 7 weeks. When she returned, her bells were rusted, and her hair shorter. Said nothing. Started mixing again the next day. Some say she eventually became a court herbalist in disguise, passing birth control recipes to concubines through dance instructions. Others claim she fled to India, opening a theatrical apothecary by the Ganges. A few insist she was never real, just a symbol passed from woman to woman, like a recipe. There's no way to know. But someone still nails herbs to the post outside that spice tent, quietly, at dusk. Some nobles paid for fake snoring. No one asked why. Now, near a guarded checkpoint on the edge of a trade route, let's watch women stitch forged permits into their hems and hope their stories are never read aloud. Checkpoints weren't always marked by gates. Sometimes they were just piles of the rocks, and a tired-looking man with a spear too short to matter. This one was different. Less checkpoint, more stage play. Flags hung crookedly over the entrance. A table sat under an awning, its corners weighed down with brass cups and dusty dice. 3 guards played a game they swore wasn't gambling, though the loser always had to clean the latrine. To pass through, you needed a permit, or something that looked like one, or someone who didn't care. That's where the women came in. Travellers, performers, washerwomen, widows, and others whose trade couldn't be named aloud. They came wrapped in layers, hems dragging through mud, skirts stiff from old sweat and secrecy. Sewn into the lining of these skirts were scraps of parchment, some legitimate, most not. The fake ones were surprisingly elegant, ornate stamps made from carved potatoes, signatures copied from tax ledgers, even fake notary seals, made of wax dyed with charcoal and chicken fat. It worked, mostly because the guards rarely looked up. Boredom was the checkpoint's greatest currency. Bribes came in the form of jokes, gossip, or well-timed compliments. One woman once got through by pretending to be blind and reciting psalms backward. The guards applauded. She didn't stop walking. Another woman, known only as Tamar, made her way back and forth across the border 10 times in one season. She changed her accent, hairstyle, and invented a new backstory each time. Said she was a herbalist, then a widow, then a silk merchant's cousin. One guard swore she had 3 different moles, on different cheeks. No one asked how he knew. Tamar's trick was the hem. She stitched her papers, real or fake, into the inside of her tunic. If questioned, she'd feign modesty, and insist she couldn't lift her garments in public. The guards, more embarrassed than suspicious, waved her through. It became a kind of unspoken theatre. There was a woman once caught with 2 sets of documents, one naming her as a grain dealer, the other as a wet nurse to a bishop. The guards couldn't decide which was more offensive, so they let her go out of sheer confusion. Some say she winked on her way out. There were punishments, of course. A forged seal could mean exile, or a fine, or 3 days cleaning chamber pots, in full view of passing caravans, but rarely did they follow through. The paperwork was too much trouble. One guard kept a collection of fake permits, said he admired the effort, had a favourite, written in purple ink, with flourishes that made the words nearly unreadable. He displayed it like art. Rumour said a woman once bribed her way through with a song. She played a one-stringed lute, sang about birds that change shape in the wind. The guards let her pass, mostly because the song was so strange. They thought it must be religious. She wasn't seen again. The checkpoint became a kind of legend, a place where lies were currency, and every hem might hold a history. Some forged permits were inherited. Mothers passed them to daughters, like heirlooms. Stains marked each generation: wine, sweat, blood. Some said the stains made them more believable. One particular night during the rainy season, a woman stopped to dry her clothes near the checkpoint fire. The guards saw nothing suspicious, until the fire revealed ink bleeding from her skirt. She looked down, sighed, and said, "That's my laundry list." They didn't believe her, but they laughed. She was allowed through. That sort of thing happened often. There's a tale about a woman who embroidered her entire life story into her dress hem, using fake Latin. When asked what it said, she replied, "It's a blessing against scorpions." The guards, terrified of scorpions, didn't read it. She passed without question. Not all were so lucky. One woman was caught with a counterfeit seal shaped like a moon. The problem was, it was accurate. Too accurate. The official in charge didn't recall ever authorizing it. Suspicion turned to fear. Was it forged or forgotten? They let her go just in case. Some say the checkpoint was cursed. Every time a woman lied there, a tile would fall off the roof. By spring, the whole structure had lost its ceiling. They never repaired it, called it divine ventilation. The hem became a symbol, hidden proof, stitched survival, thread as document. Many couldn't read what they carried. They only knew it kept them moving. One traveller claimed to carry 12 forged permits, wore them all at once, said she felt like a library. Her friend replied, "A banned one." That made them both laugh. But there were risks. One winter, a woman dropped her skirt to show a real permit, and was arrested for indecency. The law was flexible, mostly depending on who was awake. Still, the line of women kept moving, skirts swaying, hems stitched with hope, and onion skin lies. No one looked too closely. One checkpoint guard claimed, in a moment of drunken honesty, that his favourite part of the job was guessing which women were real. Real what, he never said. The guard retired a year later, left behind a small box filled with torn paper scraps, bits of lace, and one dried apricot. No explanation. It's only mentioned once, in a letter no one could verify. Now, let's drift east, where a brothel madam in a Mongol outpost trains her girls to chant holy verses, just loud enough to confuse the monks next door. The outpost was not on any map, or rather, it was, barely. A crooked dot between two faded lines, labelled only as shelter, seasonal, in a script no one used anymore. It had one well, 2 taverns, and an inexplicably well-stocked brothel. The brothel had no sign, just a wooden door with a red ribbon, a bowl of barley at the threshold, and the faint smell of goat oil and dusted ginger. Inside lived a woman called Batai. That wasn't her name, probably. It meant strong woman, or tired mother, depending on tone. No one corrected either version. Batai had been there longer than the roof, maybe longer than the well. Her hair was bound in coils like rope, her hands rough as woven mats. She never smiled, except when alone. She ran the house with 3 rules: no yelling, no drunken horses in the courtyard, and during the daytime chant something holy, just in case. The chanting wasn't for the girls, it was for the monks. You see, the outpost sat between a monastery and a supply road. Monks passed through constantly, looking for shelter or soup or absolution. Batai had learned early that religious men didn't mind what they didn't hear. But if they did hear something, It had better sound sacred. So the girls chanted, badly at first. A few could hold a tune. One claimed to have sung in a temple choir, though Bertai suspected she meant a tavern chorus. They rehearsed in the mornings, half awake, voices scratchy with sleep and smoke. The effect was sincere enough. Sometimes they used real verses, other times just vowels in a pattern. One girl repeated the syllables "Elara" for weeks, said it meant divine light in some forgotten tongue, or possibly fish soup. No one checked. Batai didn't care for accuracy, she cared for timing. The moment the lookout spotted a monk's robe at the ridge, she'd ring a bell. Everyone stopped what they were doing, adjusted robes, covered mirrors, straightened incense sticks, and started chanting, low and slow, just enough to float through the window and catch the breeze. It worked, mostly. One monk complimented them on their discipline, said he hadn't heard such devotion since the flood at Karakoram. Batai nodded, bowed slightly and offered him goat stew. He left full and spiritually reassured. There was one exception. A particularly suspicious novice insisted on inspecting the premises. Batai welcomed him with honeyed tea, guided him room by room, and casually asked if he wanted to lead the next chant. He declined. The girls hummed louder. The novice later developed a strange rash. No connection, of course, but he never returned. Some say the chants had side effects. One girl swore that after 3 weeks of humming fake sutras, her dreams became entirely silent. Another claimed she started understanding the meaning of goat bleats. Again, no proof. But the goats seemed unnerved. Batai encouraged the ambiguity. She even stitched prayer beads into the curtain tassels, lined the mirrors with verses, not actual scripture, just snippets from folk songs that sounded spiritual if said slowly. One curtain bore the words, "May your yurt stay dry." No monk ever noticed. There was a room reserved for emergencies, a small chamber lined with charcoal drawings and a single cushion. It was dubbed the penance room. If a monk insisted on staying overnight, he'd be directed there, given warm milk and a lecture on humility. No monk ever lasted 2 nights. There's a rumour Batai once hired a former novice as a scent designer. His job was to make the brothel smell like incense and boiled rice porridge. He succeeded. Too well. One client cried upon entering, said it reminded him of his childhood. He paid triple. Batai invested in more rice. The chanting wasn't constant, only during daylight. At night the rules relaxed. The red ribbon came down, laughter returned. The barley bowl was emptied and refilled with mulled wine. Still, the girls sometimes chanted out of habit. One said it calmed her nerves, another said it helped with digestion. Batai said nothing, but left bowls of salt under the cots, just in case. A travelling merchant once asked her why she ran the house like a shrine. She replied, "It is a shrine, just not yours." He didn't argue, didn't. Over time, the brothel became known as the quiet place, not because it was silent, but because no one asked questions. The monks came and went. The girls hummed. Batai watched from her stool, carving bits of dried root into meaningless talismans. Some believe she was once a nun. Others say she married a general who vanished in the snow. A few insist she was simply tired of being lied to and preferred her own fiction. One night, a monk returned without warning. Said he wanted to meditate in the penance room. He stayed 3 days, left with a new chant and a pack of dried apricots. Later became an abbot. Still used the chant. It wasn't in any scripture. Some nobles kept gold-plated chamber pots, for status or sparkle. No one's sure. Now let's climb into the cold air of the Pamir passes, where a traveller's wife pretends to be a translator, though she barely speaks, and earns enough to keep warm one more night. The Pamirs did not welcome travellers. They tolerated them, like wind tolerates cliffs, by going around them, grumbling. Dawn came slowly here, limping over jagged snowcaps and settling only where the wind allowed. The cold wasn't a sharp kind of cold. It was thick, like a wet blanket left in the dark too long. Even fire seemed uncertain. They said the mountain passes echoed with old words, prayers, bargains, threats, spoken by men long dead. But that was probably just the wind lying again. Near one such pass stood a caravan stop. 3 tents, 2 mules, and a man trying to boil tea using pine bark. He had a wife. That was unusual. Fewer women made the journey through the high passes. Fewer still lasted. She didn't have a name the other traders remembered. They called her Tala. It meant star or price, depending on the dialect. She answered to both, rarely corrected anyone, and barely spoke at all. The trick, of course, was pretending she did. Her husband was a cloth merchant. Not rich, not poor, just consistent. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't smart either. That made her job easier. Tala posed as his translator and companion. This wasn't her idea, but once a Persian merchant mistook her silence for language training. Her husband leaned in. From then on, every negotiation came with a little theatre. He would gesture and mumble. She would nod solemnly, then look the buyer in the eye and say exactly 3 words. Yes, too little, and more. That was enough. Some traders assumed she spoke Sogdian. Others guessed a rare dialect of Ugar. A few were too embarrassed to ask. Her accent, non-existent, was called refined. One man cried after she said more, claimed it reminded him of his mother. The cold helped. People didn't linger. Deals had to be made quickly. No one wanted to freeze mid-haggle. By mid-season, she'd earned them enough dried lentils and yak butter to last another month. A few even offered extra for cultural insight. She'd stare into the fire and nod. That counted as wisdom. Once she told a story entirely in eyebrow movements. A visiting scholar took notes. She was paid in smoked trout. They weren't staying in any one place. The caravan moved every few days, up one slope, down another, always chasing rumours of clear trails and better tea. She never complained. Complaining used too many words. At night, when the tents flapped like angry monks, she curled beside the fire and whispered nothing. Her husband assumed she prayed. She was actually counting how many times people used the word trust in the day. The number always felt high. There was one exception. A Byzantine courier broke his leg nearby and was brought to their tent. Half frozen, mostly delirious, he kept muttering questions in Greek. Tala knelt beside him and answered only once. Yes. He nodded, smiled, and promptly fell asleep. He later claimed she had prophesied his survival, a story that spread faster than fire. For weeks people came asking for advice. She'd hold their hands, breathe deeply and say, "Too little." They'd nod, thank her, and leave behind wool or honey. She said too little to a priest once. He left crying. Some suspected the whole act. The young merchant tried to test her, spoke in 3 languages, asked complicated questions, smiled smugly. She stared at him until his hands trembled, then said, "More." He left her 2 rings and a pack mule. Her husband didn't ask why. In truth, she knew more words, but words attracted follow-up questions. Follow-up questions led to explanations, and explanations were dangerous in places where borders shifted with the snow. Better to be misunderstood. It kept you warm. One night a woman approached her in secret, said she wanted to learn the silence language. Tala didn't answer, just passed her a stone with a line scratched through the middle. No one knew what it meant. The woman wore it around her neck for years. Some say Tala used to be a court scribe. Others say she once poisoned a governor and ran. A few insist she was mute from birth and only learned to speak 3 words by accident. All theories were equally unprovable. She never wrote, never drew. Once someone offered her parchment and ink. She sniffed the ink, sneezed, and walked away. Eventually the snow thinned. They moved east, toward the markets near Yarkand. Her husband, now convinced she could summon goodwill with a glance, started introducing her as "my lucky tongue." She didn't correct him. One evening by the fire, a child asked what her favourite word was. She thought for a long time, then said, "Maybe." It wasn't one of the 3. There's a legend that when she finally disappeared, years later in the middle of a storm, she left behind a satchel with just one item, a pebble, perfectly round with a single word etched into it. No one can agree what the word said. Some say it wasn't even in a real language, but someone still wears it around their neck. Quietly. There were snoring servants, that's all. Now, beneath the faded murals of Dunhuang, a masked woman whispers spells and sells talismans under moonlight, then burns her own name just in case it's remembered. Dunhuang never truly slept. Even at night the city buzzed with desert wind and soft arguments over relic prices. The murals inside the Mogao caves, those holy, sprawling testaments to ancient belief, watched over everything. Painted gods, bodhisattvas, dancers mid-twirl, all frozen in faded colour, their eyes wide and patient, perhaps too patient. Not far from the caves, just beyond the last torch-lit path, a tent stood under a crooked fig tree. You had to squint to notice it. Brown fabric patched with old silk scraps, and a small stone bowl at the entrance filled with sand and ash. Always warm. Inside lived a woman no one called by name. She wore a thin mask, not ornate, not theatrical. Just a veil of gauze darkened with soot. You could still see her eyes. They didn't blink much. Most knew her only by whispers. The talisman woman. The whisper merchant. Some even called her the sleeper, though she rarely seemed tired. She spoke in short phrases, sold things even shorter. What she offered was unclear. Officially, talismans. Bits of folded parchment tied with a red thread, sealed with wax melted from temple candles. Each came with a brief instruction. Bury it under your pillow. Burn before bathing. Tie it to your left shoe. Some said the talismans healed broken hearts. Others said they caused them. But there was another offering, one not spoken of openly. A touch, exchanged in silence behind a screen painted with old ink and sandalwood dust. No one described what happened back there, and no one asked. What made it peculiar wasn't the offering, but the ritual. Each full moon, without fail, the woman would burn a piece of parchment behind her tent. No one knew what it said, but she always whispered to it first, placed it in the fire, and watched it curl. Then she scattered the ashes into the wind, as if returning something unfinished. Someone once claimed they saw their own name on one of those burning slips. They left Dunhuang that night, quietly. There was a rumour that the woman had once been a nun, one of the mural painters even, until she painted herself into a corner and couldn't escape. So she left her face behind. Hence, the mask. Another story said she'd been cursed to forget her name, and the talismans were fragments of what remained. The more she gave away, the lighter she became. People believed both stories. It made her popular. Pilgrims came from as far as Turpin to buy her items. One brought her a jade bead in exchange for a blessing. She held it, exhaled slowly and handed him a pouch of ash. "Place it in running water," she said. He nodded like he understood. The river in Dunhuang rarely flowed. Still, he waited. She lived modestly, ate from a shared pot near the temple, wore sandals mended with fishbone thread, and kept a crow feather tucked behind her ear. For balance, she said. No one pressed further. When questioned, rarely about her origin, she'd just point to the sky. Once she pointed to the dirt. That answer felt truer. Some claimed the talismans glowed faintly at night. Others said they wept ink when wet. One woman swore hers laughed softly before dissolving in the rain. Again, no one confirmed. The mask, too, changed subtly over time, sometimes lighter, sometimes more opaque. Once, during a sandstorm, it blew off. She covered her face with both hands, sat down, and didn't move until someone brought it back. After that, she added ties to keep it in place. A monk once accused her of blasphemy, said the selling of spirit papers mocked the sacred cave texts. She bowed, offered him a talisman, and said, "It protects against pride." He accepted it. Returned weeks later with a limp and no further complaints. No one knew where she slept. Her price was 1 gold coin for every confirmed fact. No one paid. So she gave the facts anyway, then stole their boots while they slept. That worked. There's a tale that during one winter siege, the only message that got through was smuggled in a woman's braid. 3 knots, 2 pearls, and a brass ring. The general received it, read it silently, and replied by cutting off his own beard. No one knows what it meant. But the siege ended the next day. Eventually someone asked why they did it. Why risk so much for nothing? Mira shrugged and said, "If they won't pay me to listen, I may as well charge for the silence." Sometimes silence is a business model. Later, a new governor arrived, tried to shut the border down, declared the women unlicensed and suspicious. Within a week his guards were drunk, his documents missing, and someone had replaced his ceremonial robe with a dress embroidered with fake maps. He left before winter. No one replaced him. Some say the women were spies. Others claim they were simply tired of being lied to and decided to lie louder. A few insist the whole village was a hoax, built entirely by desert mirages and too many sleepless traders. There's still a path near that border, mostly unused. Travellers report hearing laughter in the wind and seeing bits of thread tied to the trees. Blue, red, green. It's probably nothing. They hung him twice. Apparently the first rope was too long. Now beneath a candlelit cellar in Kashgar, a man sells healing rituals nightly. And no one asks why they always involve undressing in silence. Kashgar never lacked for pilgrims. They arrived with cracked heels and shining coins, robes dusty from the Taklamakan, hearts full of confession, or something that looked like it. Some came seeking enlightenment. Some just wanted to eat figs and feel forgiven. They all passed through the old square. Beneath that square, down a narrow staircase behind a vendor who claimed to sell historic lentils, there was a cellar. Low ceiling, 1 lamp, 3 mats, smelled like cinnamon and old sweat. That's where he worked. He called himself Farid, or perhaps that's what others called him. Names shifted in Kashgar. Easier that way. Farid didn't advertise. He didn't need to. Word spread the way it always does. Quietly, behind hands, between mouthfuls of spiced lamb. They said he performed healing rituals. That was the phrase. Specific, vague, and blessedly unprovable. The first time someone called him a healer, he laughed. Then he coughed, nodded slowly, and accepted the coin. His rituals followed a pattern. First, the client, almost always a pilgrim, tired and wide-eyed, removed their shoes and placed both hands on a heated stone. Symbolic. The stone came from nowhere in particular, but Farid once said it was from the edge of pain. People seemed satisfied with that. Next came silence. He'd walk around them slowly, muttering phrases in a language no one could place. Some guessed Sanskrit. Others swore it was just Kashgari with the vowels replaced. Then, without fanfare, the ritual began. There was touch, but never rushed. Movement, but never explained. He said nothing during the act, only breathed softly, as though timing his exhale to their heartbeat. Some called it divine, others confusing but necessary. They paid well. One pilgrim returned 5 nights in a row, said each time peeled a different sin off his skin. By the end, he claimed to dream in colours he didn't know existed. Then he went blind in one eye. No one blamed Farid. He kept a collection of robes, borrowed from clients who left without asking for them back. Sometimes he wore them during rituals, other times folded neatly on the stone shelf, like trophies no one acknowledged. He never touched silver, preferred copper or fruit, said metal held on to regret. A monk once confronted him in the street, called him a fraud. Farid listened, then handed him a peach and said, "Eat this after sunset. If you dream of a river, you're right. If not, I am." The monk ate it, dreamed only of sand. He left the city the next morning. Farid wasn't alone. 2 assistants helped. Neither of them spoke. One prepared tea. The other played a single-note instrument that wasn't quite in tune. Some clients found it unsettling. Farid called it the tone of imbalance. No one questioned it twice. Every new moon, he washed the cellar floor with goat's milk and a paste made of crushed figs and salt. He called it the rinse, said it kept the energy clean. The smell lingered for days. There was a rumour that one of his rituals accidentally cured a man's stutter. Another claimed he removed guilt from the knees upward. One visitor believed Farid could summon forgiveness with a glance. He stared into Farid's eyes for 23 minutes, wept, and donated his boots. Farid wore them for a month, then gave them to a camel trader with sore ankles. Some called him a mystic, others a joke. He didn't care, said his only job was to meet need with hands. That sentence became its own rumour, written on walls, carved into spoons, whispered over stews. He kept no scrolls, no record of clients, but he had a box filled with broken items, torn prayer beads, cracked mirrors, half-burned incense sticks, each from a moment of release. He didn't explain. Once, during a sandstorm, he offered free rituals, said the wind carries shame better than fire. 4 men entered. None spoke afterward. One stayed and swept the floor for a week. No one ever saw him leave. There's an old story, too absurd to be true, that a wealthy pilgrim offered Farid 50 gold coins for a permanent cure. Farid accepted, then simply said, "Sleep." The man did, for 3 days. When he woke, he forgot why he came, called it peace, Paid again. Some say Farid trained with tantric monks. Others believe he once served in a palace, learning to read body language like poetry. A few whisper he's just a clever man who got lucky once and leaned into it forever. Whatever the origin, no one argued with results. Even skeptics, once inside the cellar, left quieter, lighter, or at least carrying fewer coins. He disappeared for a week every season, returned with new herbs, new movements, and always one new word he refused to translate. Clients would hear it during the ritual, spoken once, barely a whisper. Most forgot it instantly. One man tattooed it on his arm. It faded by morning. Eventually Farid vanished. No farewell, just gone. In his place, a folded robe, a copper bowl filled with river stones, and one scrap of parchment. On it. There's no such thing as healing, only rearrangement. Someone framed it. Now, beneath a roadside shrine carved by tired hands, rival courtesans offer free prayer readings, until dice ruin the illusion. It wasn't much of a shrine, just a half-buried statue with no face, a tilted slab of sandstone someone once carved a circle into, and 3 sticks of incense that never quite went out. Pilgrims still bowed there, mostly out of habit. The shrine sat between 2 forks in the road, one toward the mountains, one toward salt fields. Either way you needed a reason to stop. The women were that reason. 2 courtesans, both known, neither trusted. One went by Sela, the other by Rin. They didn't get along, but they shared a tent. Not for warmth, just convenience. Their rivalry was the kind that never spoke directly but echoed loudly through compliments. "She's sweet," Sela once said of Rin, "like rice left too long in the sun." Rin returned the favour. "Sela's lovely. I'd ask her to pray for me if I needed the gods to laugh." Together they invented something no one asked for. Spiritual service with bonus interpretation. It worked like this. Every client who visited the tent was offered a reading. Free, of course, with the pleasure. Just a little prayer to clarify their soul's intentions. Something to align the body and the beyond. Then came the dice. 6-sided, bone-carved, etched with strange symbols neither woman explained. Roll once before, roll again after. Whatever changed meant something. "You started with wind and ended with fire," Sailor might say. "That's a sign of release." Or poor circulation, Rin would mutter. The dice gave the illusion of depth. Clients left feeling lighter, wiser, perhaps holier. One man said his reading proved he was born under a jealous star. Another claimed his dice said he was absolved. No one asked of what. It became a ritual. Some men rolled with trembling hands. Others memorized their results, as if they'd be quizzed later. One carved his reading into a walking stick. He tripped on it daily, but said the pain reminded him of humility. Then came the monk. Grey robe, cracked lips. The sort of holy man who hadn't smiled in seasons. He watched a reading from across the road, waited until the dice clattered, then stepped forward and said flatly, "Blasphemy." Sela bowed. Rin blinked. He didn't shout, just reached into his sleeve and pulled out a pouch, poured sand over the dice. "Divine will," he said, "doesn't roll." He left before the women could answer, took 3 incense sticks from the shrine as he went. For 3 days no clients came. Word had spread, so the women adjusted. They didn't throw the dice anymore. They asked the clients to roll berries, dried ones from a tree nearby. "New system," Sela said. "Less noisy," added Rin. The monk returned a week later, saw the berries, said nothing, walked past, dropped a coin in the bowl and disappeared behind the shrine. No one knows what he did back there. Some say he returned at night when the women were gone and threw the dice himself, just once. Eventually the shrine became something else, less holy, more curious. Travellers came not just for the women, but for the ritual. Some skipped the service entirely, just wanted the reading. "What does my soul want today?" a merchant asked. Rin replied, "To be left alone." Sela smiled. "That'll be 1 copper." There's a rumour that one of the dice sets was carved from a saint's knucklebone. Another says the symbols were invented by a child who couldn't draw numbers. A third claims each die was cursed to always land truthfully, until someone lied while rolling. One client brought his own dice. They were loaded. He confessed halfway through. said he was trying to impress a spirit he'd dreamed about. They let him keep the reading anyway, for honesty. The shrine changed again. Someone painted eyes on the faceless statue. Another nailed a scarf to its neck. Offerings appeared. Plums, sandalwood, one small mirror. No one claimed them. The women didn't touch them, but the shrine seemed fuller. Eventually Seela left. Said the road pulled harder than the shrine did. Left behind her dice. Rin rolled them once a week. Claimed the results were always slightly unsatisfied. She stayed another season, then vanished one evening with a travelling storyteller. Took nothing but a shawl and a pouch of berries. The tent remained. Collapsed in on itself like a forgotten promise. The dice turned to dust in the rain, but the statue's eyes stayed. And every now and then, a traveller leaves 2 copper coins in the bowl, asking quietly, "Wind or fire?" The bowl never answers, but someone always takes the coins by morning. There's still a breeze near the shrine that smells faintly of dry incense and old laughter. Some say the monk retired, opened a bakery, refuses to sell anything in 6s. It's only mentioned once, in a dream that ends with applause. Now tucked inside a trader's caravan, a woman stitches codes into veils and sells them as fashion, hoping no one looks too closely at the embroidery. The caravan smelled like sweat and saffron. Every bolt of silk had been counted 3 times. Every scroll double-wrapped in oiled cloth. Every trader rehearsed the same half-truths about pricing and province. The desert didn't forgive forgetfulness, especially when it came in bundles. In the centre cart, balanced between lacquered crates and sacks of dried lentils, sat a woman threading silver into midnight blue gauze. Her fingers never stopped moving. Some thought she was praying, others assumed embroidery was just how she passed the time. She called herself Layla. No surname, just Layla. She smiled easily, but always off to the side, like she didn't want the full weight of your attention. She sold veils, dozens of them, transparent, opaque, triangular, full length, every colour, every thread supposedly stitched with protective blessings, or patterns inspired by cloud formations over Herat. Most buyers never asked for more than a colour. She recommended deep plum for persuasion, sage green for discretion, and pale rose for weddings, or something very close. But a few veils came with something else, hidden inside those swirls and loops, beneath the curling vine patterns or the meandering starbursts, were messages, not in words, in knots, in thread count, in how the left corner always had 1 stitch missing. It was a code, one only a handful of people could read. No one knew when Layla started. Maybe always. Maybe just after her brother disappeared near a checkpoint and someone handed her his sash. Embroidered with something that wasn't decorative at all. Her veils travelled far. Couriers wore them for sun protection. Midwives tied them to walking sticks. Occasionally a city clerk would hang one in his window and wait. The messages weren't urgent. Not usually. Mostly names, coordinates, small warnings. Delay 2 days? Don't trust the left-hand clerk? Ask the potter about figs. To most, just pretty veils. Once, a Mongol commander bought 3 in gold and wore them as shoulder wraps. Layla smiled and offered a 4th, free, she said, for balance. The 4th held nothing, or maybe that was the message. She never used ink. Ink could be scraped, spotted, smudged. Thread was quieter, more patient, and once sewn, harder to erase. People suspected, of course. One textile merchant asked why her veils always took exactly the same number of hours. She told him it was superstition. If I stitch past sundown, the colours lose faith. He didn't ask again. There was a rumour that one of her veils once stopped an ambush. A general's wife bought it for modesty, wore it to market, and a fruit vendor recognised the code in the hem. She turned back. The general never knew. Another tale claimed she stitched the name of a traitor into a wedding veil, one worn during a high-ranking ceremony. Someone read it. Someone disappeared. No one linked it to her. At least not officially. She never denied anything, but she never confirmed either. One evening a young scribe caught her marking a pattern onto parchment before stitching, asked if it was a design. She said, "No, it's a map." There's a rumour she whispered a word into a merchant's ear that made him abandon all coin. He started bartering exclusively in pairs, claimed gold, interfered with his clarity. He died wealthy, in pairs. Some said she used mirrors, that each man saw something in his reflection no one else did. Others blamed her voice, said it had a tone that tugged the soul sideways. A wandering dervish defended her once, said the men weren't bewitched, just finally listening. He offered no further explanation, just asked for one of her scarves. She gave him 2. Eventually a group of city elders sent someone to observe her. An informant, young, clever, easily forgettable. He returned 3 days later with a shaved head and a letter addressed to no one, sealed with wax shaped like a wave. No one read it. The accusations never stuck. Too slippery, too vague, and Mina never claimed anything. When asked what she believed, she'd say, "That everyone carries too many thoughts. I just take one away." She was watched, closely, but nothing ever stuck. Her hands were always empty, until the day she left. No one saw her go. But the bathhouse courtyard smelled faintly of clove and citrus for weeks after. Her room sat untouched. One scarf left folded on the pillow. Inside it, a single hairpin and a scrap of parchment. On it, a list. No names, just dates. And beside each, a small sun symbol. Some say it was a record of the conversions. Others believe it was a calendar. A few think it was a prayer disguised as scheduling. Years later, a new tenant moved into her room. Found the mirrors unusually well placed. The windows always slightly open. And a notch in the floor where someone had once knelt. Repeatedly, for reasons unknown. There's still a well by the bathhouse. Sometimes, at dusk, people say they hear laughter echoing up from the water, or the sound of scissors, or just silence that feels suspicious. A small sign now hangs beside the bathhouse entrance. It reads, "Clarity not guaranteed." It made sense to someone. Probably. Now, in the glittering port of Hormuz, a dancer performs for customs guards while crates of banned books pass quietly behind her. Hormuz glinted like a lie told too well. The port shimmered in heat and salt, markets layered over each other, ships groaning under crates of silk and cinnamon, and gulls that screamed like tax collectors. On the surface, it was trade. Beneath, it was theatre. And like any good theatre, there was a curtain. Her name, when she chose to offer one, was Soraya. She danced. Not on stages, but in the gaps between inspection tables and the shade beneath grain sacks. Always barefoot. Always speaking in more languages than she should reasonably know. Arabic, Persian, Portuguese, Gujarati, Hebrew. Fragments mostly. Enough to greet, flatter, insult, bless, and bargain. The rest she invented. Most customs guards didn't notice. She had a knack for timing. The crates would arrive early. Wood dark from sea spray sealed with rope and wax. A mix of spices, textiles, and occasionally books. Not all of them legal. Philosophy, mostly. Ideas about governance, about the afterlife, about the wrong kind of gods. Too many pages asking too many questions. The guards were thorough when not distracted. That was Soraya's job. She'd arrived just before the inspection, spinning into view with a tray of dates or a joke too layered to be fully understood. Then the dancing, loose-hipped, arm-arched, with just enough musicality to seem spontaneous, but never improvised. Behind her, men moved crates, quietly, one every few beats, one every spin, one every time she said, "Have you eaten today?" in just the right dialect. No one ever asked what she was doing there. No one ever made her stop. The senior customs officer claimed her performances set a peaceful tone. He never noticed the missing box of scrolls behind him. The key was subtlety. Once, a guard asked why her sleeves were stitched with 3 lines of silver thread. She smiled and said, "For balance." He nodded. Later, someone realised those lines matched the shipping codes for forbidden literature. But by then the ship was gone. She never accepted coin. Only objects. A carved spoon. A scarf with 1 burn mark. Half a poem. Said they reminded her to forget. No one pushed further. There was a rumour she'd once been a librarian in Tabriz, until the fire. Another claimed she used to be a language tutor to the children of a vizier, dismissed for teaching them words not in the approved lexicon. No one knew. She never explained. Once she paused mid-dance, locked eyes with a visiting scribe, and whispered a phrase in a dialect thought extinct. He collapsed. Claimed he'd heard that phrase once before, from his mother in a dream. She gave him a fig. He left without paying. The banned books kept moving, never in bulk, one here, two there, always labelled as something else. Turmeric, sandalwood carvings, bridal veils. Soraya's presence gave just enough misdirection, just enough delay. When asked how she timed it all, she'd say, "Most men listen to rhythm more than reason." Some evenings she danced on the dock at sunset. No crates then, just movement. Her shadows would stretch across the water, tangling with ropes and sails. Sailors claimed her dance could predict the weather, or perhaps just calm it. One stormy morning, the guards found a crate of ink-soaked paper near the pier. Soraya wasn't seen that day. The lead inspector wrote it off as a shipping accident. Later, someone realised the paper had no writing, just blank parchment, perfectly preserved under wax. The books had already gone. A missionary once tried to confront her, accused her of aiding heresy. She danced around him for 5 minutes, reciting proverbs in 3 tongues, none of them his. He left dizzy and deeply unsure of his convictions. She didn't appear the next day. When she returned, her ankles were wrapped in red thread. No explanation, but the crates moved faster. There's a tale that one shipment carried a single manuscript, a book that could unfold minds, that it passed through Hormuz under Soraya's watch and disappeared into the mountains. No one's ever found it. Some think it never existed. Others claim she was the book. Eventually the book slowed. Orders changed. The guards rotated. New ones didn't smile as easily. One tried to follow a crate, tripped, broke his wrist, called it divine punishment, took early retirement. Soraya danced less often after that. Sat more. Hummed to herself in a rhythm no one could place. Someone asked what she was singing. She said it was the sound of unread pages. Then one day, she vanished. Left behind a tray of dates, perfectly ripe. A scarf folded with 3 lines of silver thread, and a wooden box labelled fragile. Inside, a mirror. On the back, a phrase in 5 languages. Loosely translated, it read, "If you see me, you're not looking hard enough." A fig tree near the dock blooms late now. Locals say it wasn't there before. It probably was. Just unnoticed. Somewhere, behind a shuttered tent, someone hums in rhythm with the tide. And in the fading light of a desert town, a woman buries her earnings beneath a fig tree said to cure infertility, then walks into the dunes without turning back. The town wasn't dying. It was already dead. It just hadn't realised yet. The dust clung to walls that once echoed with haggling, now mostly silence. Wells dried. Traders passed through without stopping. Children left, then forgot to return. One bathhouse still functioned, barely. Its water tepid, its towels clean only in theory. And the fig tree still stood, bent low, roots half exposed, leaves greying at the tips like an old widow's braid. They said it cured infertility if you sat under it at dusk, barefoot, without speaking. Some said it only worked for the truly desperate. Others believed the tree didn't do anything at all. It just listened. On her last night, the woman arrived quietly. No cart, no horse, just a pack, a shawl, and a folded scrap of cloth that had once been sewn into her dress hem. No one remembered her name, not anymore. Some thought she was a midwife who vanished during the bad harvest. Others swore she'd been the tea-house girl with the perfect handwriting. A few claimed she came from elsewhere, somewhere colder. She didn't correct them, or speak at all. She walked through the empty square past the broken prayer wheel and the stall that used to sell boiled eggs. The only thing that moved was the dust, and even that was hesitant. She reached the fig tree just after sunset. Kneeling slowly, she dug into the earth with her hands. No shovel, no tools, just fingers against dry ground. It gave way reluctantly, like a tired secret. From her pack she took a pouch. Inside, coins from 8 different regions, 2 rings, a strip of silk dyed the colour of dried plum, and a single brass pin shaped like a crescent. All buried, carefully, as if each item required negotiation. She paused only once, when the fig leaves rustled without wind. Then, pressing the dirt flat with her palm, she placed one last thing atop the mound, a slip of parchment. Blank on one side, on the other, a word written upside down in ink so faint it might have been imagined. no one saw what it said. She stood, brushed off her knees, and looked west. There was no caravan waiting, no torchlit procession, just sand. She wrapped her shawl tighter, not against cold, but memory. And then she walked. Not quickly, not dramatically, just forward, into the dark. She didn't turn around. By dawn there were no footprints, just a slightly raised patch of dirt beneath the fig tree and a bowl someone placed there overnight. Inside, water, a coin, and a single red thread. The tree still blooms, not every season, not consistently, but always in silence, and never the same way twice. Travellers stop there sometimes. They don't know why. They sit quietly. Some cry. One carved their own name into the bark, then immediately wiped it away. Another claimed they saw a woman in the dunes watching, but no one else did. The town finally collapsed 2 winters later. A sandstorm pulled down the last roof. The bathhouse filled with dust. The prayer wheel split down the middle. Only the fig tree remained. There's a rumour that if you sleep beneath it, you'll dream of a woman burying things you forgot you lost. Another says if you dig where the roots meet, you'll find a slip of parchment with your name already written. No one's confirmed it, but no one tries twice. And somewhere between breath and wind she keeps walking. It made sense to someone. Probably. And though the wheels of time have turned, the silence of those footsteps still drifts across the sand. A fig tree blooms where no roads lead. A curtain still sways beside a vanished tent. Somewhere, someone rolls a dice they don't understand. Names are forgotten. Coins corrode. But the breath of a whispered bargain, pressed into cloth, stitched into sleeves, buried under dust, lingers longer than law. These women, unnamed or misnamed, crossed borders drawn by men who couldn't hear them. And yet, they moved freely, just by knowing when not to speak. Not saints, not symbols, just quiet architects of misdirection, survival, and strange comfort. Some called them liars, others never called them anything at all. But they listened, carefully, laughed, softly, hid what mattered, and left nothing behind but fruit trees, salt trails, and just enough rumour to outlive a generation. Now let the dust settle, let the incense fade. The market has gone quiet. The fire is only embers. The camel bells stopped hours ago. Nothing more to trade, nothing more to guess. The world, once so loud with bargaining and footsteps and breathless confession, now hums faintly with sleep. Let that hum carry you. Now, slowly. Let your breath match the rhythm of the unseen road. Let your shoulders sink like old tents folding in the dark. Let your thoughts scatter like silver thread pulled loose from the hem. And somewhere, beneath an abbey no one remembers, a perfectly folded tunic still waits for its owner. Sweet dreams.